Thank you very much for coming to this session on apprenticeships. My name is Barnaby Lennon. I'm the relatively new Dean of Education here at the university. I've lived a very rarefied existence, having spent most of my working life teaching at Eton and then being the head of Harrow, neither of which qualifies me to be involved in this session. When I started teaching in the 1970s at Eton, which in those days was a pretty well non-selective school, because all the pupils had to be registered for the school before they were aged 1, so it had a kind of comprehensive intake. In those days, about 15% of the population went to university, and certainly at Eton, many of my pupils, including some of my more intelligent pupils, clearly decided not to go to university. They went into the army quite a lot, or into a family business. Quite a number went into farming, that kind of thing. Anyway, when I retired, in inverted commas, I wrote a book about state schools that get very good exam results with disadvantaged pupils. And it was while doing that, I realized something that all of you will already know, and that is that now half the population go to university. And we had this big debate a couple of years ago about whether grammar schools were a good or a bad thing, and I think many people felt that dividing the population into sheep and goats at the age of 11 was quite wrong. But that's exactly what we now do at the age of 16. Half go to university and half don't. And that then raises questions about the status and morale of that 50% who don't go to university. At the same time, I was on the board of Ofqual, who are responsible for standards in examinations in England, and I was being asked to help develop ways of assessing vocational qualifications like the T-levels, which are coming along, and BTECs, and also apprenticeship standards, about which I knew nothing. And that really was my main worry, that people like me, who have spent their whole life in education, know nothing about the 50%, know nothing about those who do vocational qualifications, know nothing about apprenticeships. And I wrote a book called Other People's Children last year, which was really written, honestly, for my own benefit, so that I could try to understand what was going on. And I was interested that, national newspapers, when the Sunday Times, for example, I'm in the Sunday Times almost every week about something or other, but when I tried to persuade Sean Griffiths to write about vocational qualifications and apprenticeships, she said, no, this is not really suitable for our readers. So there is a high level of ignorance about that, and that's why I'm so pleased that you have decided to come to this session today, because it's the most important session that there could possibly be. And we'll be thinking about degree apprenticeships as well as apprenticeships as a whole. Vocational education is very obviously the biggest weakness that we have in the British educational system. And we've been struggling with it since 1867, when the Paris exhibition for the first time revealed to the world that Britain was falling behind other countries in, obviously in those days, manufacturing expertise. And that other countries, in those days, Germany, France, Italy, and Japan, were winning as many prizes as England, and then, of course, in subsequent years, the United States joined that list. But the process of trying to match the Germans, let's say, in terms of vocational qualifications and apprenticeships, has been very fraught for reasons that we might think about today. And, it's still, I would say, although, I think that the measures that this government has taken have been potentially very good, there's still a great deal of potential for it to fail, as it has failed year in, year out, not least since the end of the Second World War. It remains the great challenge for any government responsible for education and skills. So we're going to work along the row to start with, and it's a great pleasure for me to welcome on your behalf Professor Julian Chaudhuri, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Plymouth, and he will then be succeeded by Euan Blair, who founded WhiteHat. He's going to tell us about that. And then Katherine Everest is an apprentice. Thank goodness we're going to hear what it actually is like from the student perspective. And then Dr. Fiona Aldridge, who's the Director of Policy and Research at the Learning and Work Institute, is going to tell us some more. And then it's going to be over to questions from you. So let's start with Julian.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I just want to say a few things about Plymouth's experience in running degree apprenticeships, and hopefully that will set the scene for the next talks and for the discussion. Let me just start by telling you a bit about the University of Plymouth. It's a post-92 university, as I'm sure you all know, and it's quite a long way from here, I can tell you from experience. But as a university, we've always supported a broad range of students and learners. We've had a very strong focus since it was a polytechnic on widening participation, inclusive entry, and because of the position of the university in the southwest, we've always supported our regional feeder students. And I think we're quite a unique university in that we have probably the largest number of partnerships with FE colleges. So just to give you a feel, we have about 20,000 students on campus in Plymouth. We have another 16,000 students in our partner colleges. And the majority of those students are within the Southwest Peninsula, although we also have outposts elsewhere. So we have a good background in kind of the breadth of education. It's not just simply A-levels, Russell Group, etc. We're also known for our teaching innovation. We pride ourselves on how we develop our academics to be good lecturers. And we've also pioneered new paradigms of teaching in medicine and dentistry. We were the first medical school that stopped using cadavers for students to study anatomy. And my colleagues tell me that the regulatory hurdles they had to jump through to do that were huge, although now many medical schools have followed suit. But back to today's topic, we're a university which has its own challenges. We are in an area of generally low university participation. Cornwall as a county has the smallest growth in 18-year-olds going to university in the whole country. And that surprised me when I went to Plymouth about 3 years ago. We also have lower, higher skilled employability, partly because of the seasonal nature of a lot of the employment in Cornwall and Devon. But also our economy is dominated by SMEs, and about 80% of those are micro SMEs. So we are a region which has got very small businesses. We don't have the big blue chips that you'll see in London and Leeds and other places. So that is context to tell you about our apprentices' journey. We are on a journey. We deliver a range of apprenticeships, and I'm containing my comments to degree apprenticeships. We deliver levels 5, 6, and 7 apprenticeships in partnership in many occasions with our partner colleges. We run apprenticeships in the Chartered Manager Standard, which I'm sure you're aware of, a range of nursing apprenticeships, and also degree and postgraduate engineering apprenticeships. So what I wanted to do this morning, very briefly, is to share with you our observations and reflections based on about 3 years of operation. And I'm going to focus this on 3 particular themes. So first of all, the people aspects of apprenticeships. First of all, apprentices as learners, and this I think goes to the heart of the introductory comments, that universities have traditionally taken on board a certain type of student with a certain type of background. But apprentices in a university experience have a very different kind of learning experience. They're in a different setting, different learning and teaching needs. The majority of their learning will happen in the workplace, and they'll come onto university ground or work with university staff much less frequently than full-time undergraduate students. But also university can be quite a daunting idea, especially given the stereotypes of universities and their students. Employers are people too, and I'll come back to employers specifically as a main point, because I think, again, that for us has been quite a lot of learning. The other side of the coin of the people story is the academic staff and university staff more generally. So whereas apprentices are non-traditional learners, this is about giving non-traditional university education, which for many staff who maybe have been, like me, in higher education for their whole career, it's quite a big change thinking about the feedstock, the intake, and what we deliver in lecture theatres. So from our experience, we've identified or reflected on there's significant support needed to help academic staff, particularly, but also admin and managerial staff, people who have not been previously involved in apprenticeships. And these colleagues need to be educated to understand the differences needed in the ethos of apprenticeships, curriculum design, and that I'll come back to in a minute, and also the delivery of material required for an apprenticeship. Apprenticeship activity has engagement with many university services and systems, and these are all originally designed for a particular type of learner and a particularly different funding regime. This also requires a change in cultural adjustment. Let me move on to part 2, which is organisation of apprenticeships. This is key and has to be actively managed. And for those that work in universities, the words active management and academic staff don't necessarily go together. When we're thinking about apprenticeships, this is a different ballgame completely. Firstly, there's the relationship with the ESFA. This is really tight compliance that's needed, and the reporting and financial flows are possibly quite different from what you're doing already as a university. What works very well for Plymouth is that because of our partnership activity, which goes back nearly 40 years, we have a central unit, an academic partnerships unit, and our apprenticeships sit within them, especially the contract negotiation, the employer negotiation, and the compliance. And so that works very well, having a centrally managed approach to managing the contracts. Similarly, the data reporting financial arrangements also take time to understand and again put in place the required infrastructure. Strategic intent is important. It's, I think, essential to have an institutional strategy around apprenticeship work, and that's again to ensure a top-down engagement of all stakeholders about what's going on. Senior staff in faculties, I think, are aware of the potential of apprenticeships in many areas: diversification of income streams, widening participation, protection of market share, and drivers. However, subject staff sometimes need persuasion and enlightenment to grasp, prioritise, and ensure these opportunities are taken forward. Apprenticeship leadership is key. Programme leadership in traditional degrees is one thing that we're all aware of and do in our slightly own way, but leadership of apprenticeships is not something that can be passed on to a relatively junior, inexperienced member of staff. It needs someone with flexibility of thinking and agility in their mindset to be able to ensure that the tripartite relationship between the learner, the employer, and the university works well. And finally, the curriculum. So many apprenticeship curriculum, and we're guilty of this ourselves, have been created by looking at our undergraduate programme and thinking, how can we rebadge this, or how can we develop this? But essentially, we have to look at the traditional undergraduate model separate from the apprenticeship model. Sure, there'll be overlap, and there should be overlap, but you can't run an undergraduate degree programme in engineering in 2 days a week to satisfy the apprentices, and clearly apprentices are not going to be in universities 4 or 5 days a week. So there's some thinking required there. The third point I was going to mention is employer engagement. And this is important that we recognise that the employer is a customer in this relationship. A big university, for example, like Plymouth, has engagement with employers across many fields. There is research engagement, there's work placement engagement. Employer engagement for apprenticeships is another string to that bow. It may not be the same people in the companies, although given our micro SMEs, it's generally the same people in some of these cases. Some of our employer relationships have not worked, and that's because of the use of overly academic language and ethos when dealing with our employers. We have to have recognition of the needs of the employer as well as the apprenticeship. So related to that is the importance of an employer engagement strategy, where you've got some people who know how to work with employers, know how to talk their language, but also understand what degree apprenticeships are about. That's also key. And also, as I've mentioned already briefly, apprenticeships require a different type of employer engagement. Employers can and will want to be involved in apprenticeship context content that's being delivered as well as the training models. And let's not forget progress monitoring. That is really key for apprenticeship employers. I should say, when you add all this together, and I'm not meaning to be gloomy, I'm trying to be quite honest and tell you about what we've experienced. But the big wins in seeing our apprenticeship learners graduate with degrees as well as progress in their companies, it's really quite remarkable, and does address that 50% of students who are non-traditional, who haven't gone to university in the past, who now we're dealing with. Let me wrap up by just giving you my top 3 points that I think apply to what we're doing at Plymouth, but may help you. The first one is a real understanding of how degree apprenticeships coexist with traditional undergraduate degrees. We cannot just bolt things on. We have to design and run these programs, bearing in mind both student groups. For me, one of the top 3 areas is leadership of apprenticeships. Leadership of the apprenticeship activity in the university, but also leadership of the individual standards that students are working with you on. That's key. And finally, and I haven't talked about this before, but it's becoming increasingly important to us now, is the student experience for apprentices. As our apprenticeship number is now becoming quite large, how does that impact on those apprentice students having access to student services, to the library, to having access to academic staff in the way that our normal undergraduates do? When we had a handful of apprenticeships, it wasn't really a big issue, but it's now scaling, it's becoming important in terms of the interaction across the campus. So I'll stop there, and over to you.
Julian, thank you very much indeed. Over to Euan.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to stay seated and keep my remarks fairly brief so we can get on to questions at some point. I'm sure you have a lot. But for those of you who aren't aware of WhiteHat, I'm the co-founder and CEO of WhiteHat. We are a tech startup on a mission to create a diverse group of future leaders. And we think that we'll do that by building an outstanding alternative to university. And I'm very conscious being in this room surrounded by people in the higher education sector, talking about an alternative to university might not necessarily appeal to everyone. But I think if you look at the current macro situation, we have universities and higher education getting more and more expensive to young people. That's an almost inevitable trend based partly on moves by government, but also more and more of the population going to university and more universities emerging. And at the same time, you've got employers complaining nearly universally that they're often having to retrain grads to do things they actually need them to do. And then finally, something that is really hindering society is there is a complete lack of diversity in our current setup. And this afflicts universities, it operates in schools, and then spills into the workplace. A stunning statistic from the Sutton Trust, about half of young people on graduate programs were educated at private school. That's versus 7% of the country. So we've got a problem of access. And then at the same time, if you're claiming free school meals in year 11, you've only got a 4% chance of making it to a Russell Group university. So at the moment, we've got this crazy situation where the world of work is being transformed. The kinds of jobs people are doing are being transformed. And yet we've got the same small part of society benefiting disproportionately from having opportunities and access to these careers. So we try and solve this problem at WhiteHat in 3 main ways. The first is giving employers a way of measuring potential that's not just based on work experience and academics. And this is so important because potential's an incredibly difficult thing to define, but a one-size-fits-all model based on academics is not right and it's not good. So we look at competencies, values, and desires, and we do this through a combination of algorithmic matching and also work with our talent team to support people through the paths they want to take. The second is about applied learning. So it's teaching people how to do things. And we've brought some of the best content from around the world into apprenticeship programs in things like data science with people like General Assembly, software engineering with Flatiron School, who do some of the world's best software engineering courses, and things like project management with Grant Thornton. All of this is designed to make sure that this kind of slightly unsexy vocational education piece people keep talking about can be reimagined as something that actually provides people with skills that we need to succeed in the future of work. And then the third and final piece of what we do is probably the most important. It's all about community, because apprenticeships cannot and should not just be about work and training. You've got to have access to more than that. So we give apprentices access to socials. They have networking events, meetups, society, sports teams. We actually had our first apprentice wedding just a few weeks ago. And all of this is really to show that The networks people build at university are essential. They are really important. We can't get away from that. We've got to give people alternative ways of building these networks in a non-traditional context. And this is actually working, because if you look at the kind of employers that are working with us on apprenticeships, Clifford Chance, Accenture, Google, Facebook, Salesforce, Publicis, Warner Brothers, a list of some of the best and most storied companies from around the world, you can now go and work there without having a degree or without ever stepping foot on an academic campus. That's an incredibly powerful thing, and it is a good thing for society, but most people aren't aware of that. So parents, teachers, schools, people in higher education don't understand yet about this new reality. And so I think it's really important, it's incumbent on all of us to talk about it and make it very clear that we need to move past a one-size-fits-all model. There is a place for universities and apprenticeships. I think the only thing I would say about degree apprenticeships that is slightly negative is degree apprenticeships cannot just be the pinnacle of apprenticeships on their own, because I'd like to see us move beyond the idea that come what may, you have to have a degree if you want to do the very best jobs. Be that a degree gained through an apprenticeship route, or be that a degree gained through a traditional university experience. There are other ways of assessing people. There are other ways of quantifying potential. I think we've got to be incredibly open-minded about that, particularly as we move into an era where a lot of the things people have relied on for many years, both for assessing talent and also training people, are being disrupted and are changing. Thank you.
Thank you, Euan. Could you just clarify for me? Obviously, these companies have a contract with you to help organise their apprenticeship plans. Do potential apprentices, students, also approach you, or do you leave that to the companies?
Yeah, so essentially it's basically a marketplace. So you have on one side people looking for apprenticeships, effectively your supply of talent, and on the other you have employers who are looking for apprentices to fulfill the roles they need. And so we match them through our platform, and then we go and deliver that apprenticeship.
So a potential student can certainly go onto your website.
Absolutely.
Okay, now let's hear from Katherine, who is an apprentice.
Hello, and I'm really happy to be here today. So I was going to cover this in 3 ways, kind of roughly about my scheme as a whole, and my journey and how I got here, and then kind of my experience so far. So the scheme that I'm on is through Pearson College London, so a subsidiary of Pearson, the education company, and it's the Chartered Management Degree Apprenticeship Scheme. But it's not your normal, I would argue, apprenticeship. It's rotational. So I've worked in 3 FTSE 100s over the course of my degree apprenticeship, so I'm just at tail end. And there were 5 companies which the apprentices on this scheme could work through, so IBM, Unilever, Tesco, Direct Line Group, and Pearson. And the first year you work at your home company, and then you go off on like 16 months on 2 different secondments at the other companies, and then you rotate back round to your home company with that experience that you've gained. So for me, this has been so invaluable, working at such brilliant companies and working and learning at the same time. So my degree is the business management degree. So how did I get here? I started school in a comprehensive, and then graduated, went on to a grammar school, and they were very pushy. They were like, go to university, it's a safe bet. If you want to get a good job, that's the way you want to go. And I was thinking about the careers, what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to do business management. I knew it was something that I was passionate about. I went to a careers fair back in like year 9, and I'd seen apprenticeships around. I knew they existed. So it involved a lot of Googling. I'd even spoken to my head of 6th, and she was like, if you want to go for it, we can help read over things, but that's as far as we can go. I think the information and guidance has come a lot further since the levy has been introduced. A lot of people, it's a lot better than it used to be. When you say apprenticeships, people thought, oh, that's for like engineering, that's for construction. Is that degree apprenticeships? How does that work? So there was a lot of conversations that I've had over the years about what it is, how it works, and people are like, oh, okay, that's actually a really good deal that you're getting, to earn while you learn. And so, I'd applied to a BBC one through Pearson College, and then Pearson College sent some marketing through a little bit later when I was unsuccessful on the BBC one, and said, have you heard about this brand new scheme? And I thought, this is too good to be true. Let's give it a go, and fingers crossed, and here I am today. And so the experience so far. So I also had to move to London for the apprenticeship. So I would say that's probably one slight challenge that there is the access across the UK. These apprenticeships did seem very city-centric. So for those who are wanting to access apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships, that is something you have to be able to move and then travel. But it has been brilliant. Pearson College have been really supportive in terms of kind of the tutors, but also in the discussions with line managers to understand, okay, I need the 20% off. I have to attend university on the Friday. This is the other work that I'm doing behind the scenes. Because when I'm at work, you're doing work, but also on the Fridays that I have off. And in my evenings, I'm spent doing lectures, readings, studying. And it's that wraparound support. And that has been really good. But it does mean that you have to manage expectations of your colleagues and the people around you saying, I want to do it. I'm really eager to help and learn and give me work, but I've also got additional work and study to do. And in terms of student experience, as apprenticeships have grown, the apprenticeship student body has really grown as well. And that's meant that there's more societies. The Pearson College have changed some of the industry days and events to the evening, so you can attend after class rather than during the day. So that has been a really good move over the time that I've been there. So yeah, that's my experience so far.
Good, thank you very much, Katherine. So you're working for 4 days a week,
Yes.
doing work experience, basically? Is that how you describe it?
I would probably say I've been trusted with actual proper job roles, which was quite daunting when you first start. It was very good that I was started at Pearson, who understands education, who understands students. So they were very much knew that I was like deer in headlights, okay, brand new to the world of work. But from there, I was granted more like responsibility, and in other positions, after having like that 12 months within Pearson and growing there, and then working at Tesco and then Unilever, I was given essentially an assistant brand manager role to then support. So it was very kind of like, okay, I'm in the real world of work, and you were trusted to do your job. It wasn't shadowing. It wasn't go and photocopy this, make me a cup of tea. It was, okay, we're doing this marketing campaign. What are your thoughts?
And are you being paid a living wage?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can afford to live in London, just about. And Pearson are taking care of all your university fees, so you won't have any debt at the end of it.
Yes.
And in terms of the university bit, how does your assessment compare with those people who are just doing a straightforward business studies degree? I mean, do you have to reach a similar standard to them? Are you going to be doing the same exams, literally, as other students who aren't on an apprenticeship route?
So with the business management degree side, our course was set when we joined. So we didn't choose our modules, where I think full-time students have that flexibility.
Okay.
But that was decided as part of the standard and how it's all pulled together with the employers who are running the scheme. So it's kind of like, these are the skills we want you to have. This is your then scheme of work. And in terms of the assessments, everything would have run the same if you're doing the same module as a full-time student or as a degree apprentice. Your assessment deadlines are exactly the same. So you're always running to the same timelines.
It's just you've probably got rather less time than they have.
Probably, unless they're working as
I
well.
assume.
But yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Fiona, over to you.
Thank you. So I work for Learning and Work Institute. We're a research and policy organisation working across learning, skills and employment. And I'm quite heavily involved, particularly with the Department for Education, around apprenticeship policy, of which degree apprenticeships are a small but growing part. The numbers are still in the very small thousands, although while we've seen an overall decline in apprenticeship starts, the numbers are growing around degree apprenticeships, but still very, very small. And like the rest of the panel, I think they're a great idea and great potential, although there is still much more work to be done to make them a success in this context. But just building on kind of a few points to sort of add to what people have said first, I think it's really easy when we talk about apprenticeships to think that they are courses. They're courses in HE and they're courses in FE. Apprenticeships are a job, and they are a job with training. And so whilst from a provider's perspective it's about employer engagement, actually when we work with employers are thinking about how an institution engages with them around their business and the job roles they have. And so it's not just that there's engagement, but some of the kind of power balances are changed. I think another important thing to remember is this is not just about 18-year-olds, it's not just about young people. Half of apprentices are over 25. And so you are not just thinking about this kind of new entrance to the labour market. We hear a lot said about apprenticeships, which is about that transition into the labour market. But for many, it's about career changing, it's about upskilling, it's about a role they already have with an existing employer and some extra training there. Third point is it's not just about the other 50%. So as degree apprenticeships become increasingly attractive, there's some great ones out there and we've heard some great examples, then your children, my children, might be attracted to these. And there's a real concern that kind of middle class elbows are pushing out some of the young people or older adults that for whom a degree apprenticeship could provide that first way into accessing higher education. And so while the government has many aims about apprenticeships, and probably the fact that it has many aims sometimes thwarts its success because of a lack of clarity about exactly what it's there to do. But one of the things that government talks about is about widening opportunities, and that's really, really important. It's really important that we see more people access higher education that wouldn't have chance to do. But when we look at some of the profile of degree apprentices and apprentices per se, then we're not necessarily meeting those aims. And therefore, when you are thinking about developing degree apprentices, thinking about how we make it accessible for that other 50%, if that's what you think it's there for. And then just a final point about affordability. There will be a growing body of evidence about the returns to degree level apprenticeships, just like there are to other levels, and absolutely this could be a really strong return on investment, but there are some questions about affordability in the short run. It's great if there's a long-term return, but you have to be able to afford to do an apprenticeship in the first place. It's great that you're getting that living wage to be able to undertake an apprenticeship, but for many apprentices, given the minimum wage is much lower than national minimum wage, that can be a real issue, particularly if you have to travel. So I was just having a bit of a Google yesterday and thinking about whether my daughter, who is only 13 to be fair, would do a degree apprenticeship, and she would really like to do something around data science. So I had a look, and there is a standard, and there's 63 of them, so there's not all coverage, but there is one. It is approved for delivery. The nearest provider for us is 60 miles and the next one 110 miles away, but I thought that's okay because she'd have to travel to go to university if she did that alternatively. Now, they don't do day release, so she would have to travel to them on that 1 day a week. And then I looked for an apprenticeship, and actually there isn't one available for her. So these could be really great opportunities. But while there are just still a few, and while there's some real challenges about who gets access and making them affordable, I think there's much more work to do.
Thank you, Fiona. And I think although we would all agree that social mobility is one very important objective of apprenticeships, the thing that has bedeviled vocational education in England is snobbery. So I personally think that it would be quite a good thing if we could hear more middle-class parents saying they would be quite keen for their children to do an apprenticeship. So I mean, there are many different levels, if you like, and I'm certainly promoting apprenticeships in independent schools because I think, we need to break down that barrier of snobbery which has inhibited the whole system of vocational education hitherto, and now's a really good moment because you can see that thanks to the data that's been published that going to university is not necessarily the best thing for everyone. And in many senses, apprenticeships are better. Okay, are there any questions now from the floor? We've got a microphone here. This is a wonderful opportunity. Here we are, yeah. So.
Okay, my question is for you, Euan. You said you have alternative ways of measuring potential talents, and then you spoke about competencies, values, and desires. How do you measure those things?
Sure.
Good question.
Yeah, great question. So we focus on a few different ways of doing that. We basically look at what we call core competencies, the most important of which is intent, broadly motivation. And this is because regardless of your background or your experience or anything else, if you are not broadly highly motivated and actually keen to learn more and do something in this arena that you're entering into, it's very difficult to coach you and train you in the way that you need to be successful. We then also look at problem solving, we look at conscientiousness, we look at grit and resilience, and finally interpersonal skills. And we basically do a blend of self-reporting, partly through our tech platform, and then actual assessment in what we call kickoff days, where we bring in potential apprentices, we put them through various tests and assessments, we have them do a few kind of group exercises, team building exercises, and then we build out a digital profile that we present with employers. So we're still assessing people, and you still have to be really good in order to go and access a lot of these opportunities. We're just redefining who gets to decide what good is and what that looks like. And then we're constantly looking at outcomes for our apprentices, what employers are saying based on first success at interview, but then crucially, and more crucially, in fact, success at job performance, to make sure that those characteristics and those competencies are accurate and the way we're measuring them makes sense.
Thank you. Okay. So Professor Sage here wants to ask a question. Here. There. Stop. There.
Thank you, Barnaby. I'm really encouraged to hear that apprenticeships are coming back on the scene, because it was in the 1970s, wasn't it, when the CNNA degrees in the technical polytechnics were very highly regarded, and somehow when they came into universities, this all faded away, the apprenticeship model. However, it's very important, and Barnaby made a point about this, that we look at this kind of value system being inculcated in our schools, because still we're hung up on academic success as being whether you fail or pass in our system. And we need to spend a lot more time on looking at how we assess and teach personal and practical abilities. Now, they do this in other countries. Just been in Italy, amazing students. They're 4 years ahead of ours because of their concentration on the personal and practical development of students as well as academic. When can this happen, and how can we make it happen? I've been writing and talking about it for years.
Many of our schools are driven by the government performance measures, where going on to university is an important element. In my experience going around state and independent schools, they are still very affected by the need to get splendid A-level results, very good university entrance, and complete ignorance about the alternatives. What can we do about it? Has anyone had any ideas? Yeah.
So thank you for that question. I think that opens a huge can of worms, actually, which goes far beyond just apprenticeships. So my initial reaction to what you said, I think some of it is about our culture and how we use language, and some of it is almost about our snobbery as a country, and I use snobbery in the small s way, about technical and technical matters. Let me just pick those two up very quickly. First of all, the language around the word vocation. So from where I'm sitting, I would say that in our university, those students that are studying medicine, dentistry, engineering, are all actually doing vocational studies, because they're leading directly to an endpoint. But you don't hear medical students being talked about in the same way as engineering apprentices. So there is a language, a tightening up of language that's needed. And the second point was going to be, I'm an engineer myself, but yet as a chartered professional engineer in the UK, my status is very different from if I was in Italy or Germany, because of the language around technical delivery, technical subjects, vocational subjects. So the comments you made about the content and how it gets into schools and all those aspects are key, but one really big thing is about culture and language and how we talk about these things. Because there are lots of, to take your word, Barnaby, middle-class parents who support their children doing law and medicine and some engineering. These are vocational subjects, but yet they're not treated in the same way as some of the subjects are in the degree apprenticeship standards. So I'd say language and how we talk about it has got to change.
Yeah. What did your parents think? Were they happy? Or were they sad?
I was being pulled either way by either parent. So my dad didn't go to university and my mum did. So my dad was like, you can still do quite well. And just go straight into work. And then my mum was like, oh, but a degree will get you further. And so I was pulled on either arm, essentially. So it was a good compromise, a degree apprenticeship. But no, it was talking them through, looking into it, doing the research was really useful. But yeah, in terms of schools, it was very much like go to university, try and get into Russell Group, and that's what was being pushed.
Yeah. You were at a grammar school, so presumably most of your friends, that's exactly what they did. Is there anything else we can do about the culture? It's a massive and important issue, isn't it?
So
Fiona,
in the schools, there is a very common issue facing you where particularly you might have some schools talking to their students about apprenticeships, but probably those that they filtered off as not being able to go to university anyway. So there's something about measuring schools. So schools get measured on destinations to university, and if we're also thinking about other destinations that are valuable, then measuring those would drive some behaviours. There's been some efforts through the Baker Clause to get FE providers and employers into schools to support more independent advice and guidance, which seems to be having limited success, but actually engaging with young people and their parents about the options and some of the returns on those options. And I guess they're over time, especially if degree apprenticeships really take off, and we have some great success stories of people who have built successful careers, of businesses that are dependent on the kind of skills and the success of those apprentices within them, some of that would change. But absolutely there needs to be more of an offer that's robust and that has those great success stories in order to be able to attract those parents and young people in the first place.
Just picking up on that piece, we've almost avoided schools in many ways actually to date, because we've reached a lot of young people directly on social media. We've done a lot of campaigns. We work with a lot of charity groups. We get about 1,000 people a week applying to be WhiteHat apprentices. There's huge demand out there. And at the moment, we're only doing this in Greater London and the South East. We find that schools most of the time are sincere in wanting to know about this, but the structural problems you mentioned around league tables and how destinations are measured are one problem. The other is actually that there isn't a single point application system for apprenticeships. So a UCAS for apprenticeships is actually something we're looking to build at the moment at WhiteHat, because it's a massive point of friction. Teachers don't really know where to send people if they want to go and look at these opportunities. We also launched a free platform for schools, parents, teachers, and young people called careerhacker.ai that has case studies of apprentices, ideas about kind of what you might want to do in your career, explore some of the alternative pathways. And we still hear far too frequently stories from our apprentices one of us gave a talk the other day. She's an apprentice at Facebook. And she said her head of sixth form basically told her she was a smart girl and she was self-selecting failure if she didn't apply to whatever university would take her. She's now a digital marketing apprentice at Facebook, earning a very considerable amount of money on this incredible trajectory. And the fact that the people who were supposed to be responsible for giving her pastoral guidance and support were giving her such wrong-headed information makes us very angry, but we can't do anything about it unless we're kind of proselytizing and spreading this message.
Yeah. There was a brilliant article written by Paul Johnson, who runs the Institute for Fiscal Studies, saying that his son wanted to be a computer software developer. And he tried to find out how you could get an apprenticeship in that area and struggled. And when you compare that to the ease with which you can fill in a UCAS form, it was absolutely obvious that you need a UCAS for apprenticeships. So let's hope that that comes along soon. It will be a really important next step.
Just on Paul, it's actually something we're talking to him in the IFS about, because they have an incredible data set for this.
Yeah. And you know, you need to get the evidence that people who've got apprenticeships are doing better than those who've got university degrees, which presumably won't be that difficult, but that evidence needs to be out there. Right, any other questions?
Yeah, briefly, we've got a speaker tomorrow, President Euan, who's from Northeastern University, has written books and talked about the importance of preparing graduates that are robot-proof to sort of meet the challenges of artificial intelligence and algorithms and things. And again, obviously, our Vice-Chancellor has done similar publications in recent years. So how would you respond to a concern that some may have that apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships may be specialising students too early, and the jobs they've trained for and that they've prepared for don't exist within 10 years?
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good question, isn't it? Because the great thing about reading history at universities, you don't have to worry about what job you're going to do. You're postponing that for 3 or 4 years. Whereas For these younger apprenticeships, we're talking about someone who's making a career decision at the age of 18, which not everyone can make. Are they making a mistake in any case, going down a particularly narrow road at that young age? What do you think? What does experience show?
I mean, I think it depends on which degree apprenticeship and which course you do as to how kind of specific it is. I mean, for me doing business management, business can mean a whole plethora of things. It could mean finance, it could mean marketing, it could mean digital product or product management, any range of things. So in that sense, doing this and having various placements, working at different companies, getting a real feel for different industries has been invaluable. Sometimes I think, oh, maybe finance could have been something. And then you talk to someone in finance, might not be my cup of tea. And that's a good experience to have. So I think it depends on the qualification as well. But also, who's to say if you don't get along with it and you couldn't step back out after having that experience and go on and do a degree or another qualification to get you on the path that is more suitable for you. So, it's multi-stage, I think.
Yes, Fiona.
So I think it's an important point, but I don't think it's a point that separates between apprenticeships and another alternative. I think it's an issue about the design of the apprenticeship. So if you look internationally at the best, it's a broad program that prepares you for a career in a particular sector or range of occupations. I think one of the risks of the ways in which our standards are designed is that they are often too narrow and absolutely equip people for the job that they would do today and maybe not the job that they would do in 5 years' time and 10 years' time. But that's a design issue about the current standard rather than necessarily what it might be. And of course, what you want on the back of that is really good progression routes, so that an apprenticeship might be the thing you start with, but it isn't the thing you end with. And I think that will, given that we could be having 50-year careers, that needs to be the same whether you go through a traditional HE degree route or through to an apprenticeship, that there are other options throughout life to upskill and reskill.
It's such a great question because it goes to the heart of the problem with apprenticeships at the moment. And we spend a lot of time telling people we're not an apprenticeships organisation, right? Yes, we deliver apprenticeships, but apprenticeships are basically, at the moment, as rendered traditionally, a way of assessing at the end of someone's doing a certain course, whether or not they have the ability in that field to do the thing they're supposed to do. That's actually far too limiting. And we've built our programs to focus on how you create T-shaped individuals, people who can have a level of specialism in one area, but are ultimately generalized specialists. So every single apprentice, be it digital marketing, software engineering, business administration, with us, will do a Future Leaders Foundation focusing on how to manage your finances, how to be a citizen. We were stunned when we found most of our apprentices weren't voting, and actually that's a big problem. How to engage with the world around you, how to network, how to public speak and present. And these are all really important elements. And I completely agree with Fiona's point on apprenticeship standards being too narrow. It's something we've spent a lot of time talking to the government about. You have, at the moment, about 400, 500 standards. They're on this course to go and find 1,000 new standards. At that point, once someone's broken a production assistant into a production and sound assistant, a production and lighting assistant, or a production and televisual assistant, you're making their specialism far too narrow. These jobs are going to change and people need to be able to think and move laterally. So I think we can do that. Unfortunately, the apprenticeship sector, as many of you will know, is still riddled with very traditional incumbents who aren't necessarily very interested in innovating. And we've just got to get more innovators into apprenticeships and more people from outside the sector and actually from outside education.
And also more money into further education colleges. I went to a further education college the other day to look at a car maintenance course, and they were working on a car which was 15 years old. And a lot of what they were doing they knew was inappropriate for a modern vehicle, but they didn't have the money to purchase the necessary equipment. And one of the things that's got to happen, hopefully in the next spending review, is to significantly increase the budgets for further education colleges, which have fallen way behind universities and are the integral part of our vocational training in England, and again, all the IT equipment in those colleges is pretty antediluvian at the moment. Needs to be replaced. Okay, any more questions? Yeah, this gentleman at the front here.
Neil Ward from the University of East Anglia. We've heard about apprenticeship opportunities being not very sort of evenly distributed. There's a geographical patterning. It's particular kinds of companies. The number of standards is quite restrictive. I just wondered whether panel members thought that it was perhaps a mistake to make the apprenticeship system so strongly employer-led.
Well, that's a really good question. A question which the country has been asking itself for at least 100 years. Who should be setting the lead for vocational education? Should it be the employers, or should it be FE colleges? Should it be the Department for Education or the Department for Trade or many of the other departments? And there's been a lot of uncertainty created by the inability to answer that question. So have employers got too much say, do you think?
Well, at the moment, of course, it's the levy that will drive the employers to want to see their employees become apprentices to offset the levy payment. So at the end of so I think it is a very interesting question, because from where I've been working in this area, it's simply where are the employers and their levies? How can we help them to spend it? How can we help train students? But then we're trying to fit a quart into a pint pot by thinking the industrial strategy is also saying we need more people in this area, more people in that area. And in our part of the world, down in the southwest, we have a very different employment demographic to maybe in the Midlands. So in a sense, the local employers are calling the shots, and we work with them as far as we can to develop apprenticeships that A, meet the standard, and B, meet their requirements. But that brings challenges in itself. So I think there probably isn't a simple answer that says yes or no, government or industry or universities and colleges. I think it has to be quite granular. But I think it's about setting the principles underneath that should be important, so that it's about, at the end of the day, about creating something for the learners to be able to develop and go on and progress. Some of it could be social responsibility on behalf of the employers to develop their staff and to give them a route to the future. And of course, the way that higher education is being talked about at the moment, everything is pointing towards government strategy, industrial strategy, and the economy of the country. So I don't think I've got a simple answer to your question, but I think it probably requires a bit more pulling together these strands to give us some principles from which we can build something more robust. But I think that the other point, of course, though, is that from my understanding, the levy pool is not being drawn down on nearly as fast as it's being paid into. So there is something fundamentally not quite right, despite all the exciting things that are happening.
Okay, everybody, we're going to have to stop. Let's just go down the line. Ask everyone to say one thing that they would do to improve the apprenticeship system if they could tomorrow. What one thing would you choose?
I'm going to steal Euan's idea, actually, and think actually we need a central way of recruiting and marketing and advertising apprenticeships. Yeah.
So given you've stolen my idea for that, I will choose
now you've got to think
else.
of the second.
Yeah, correct. I think it's just to change the entire way we talk about and frame apprenticeships. This outstanding alternative to university piece. Universities can play a role in this, but they shouldn't be the only role. And we've got to be wary of actually making sure universities don't just run this entire system in the same way, and then it becomes a poor stepchild. The only final thing I wanted to say is we are very, very keen to work with any forward-thinking, innovative universities, conscious I'm in a room full of people from higher education. If they're actually serious about designing an innovative apprenticeship model, then talk to us, because keen to have that conversation.
We'll do that. Katherine?
Mine would be to build on that point, is improving kind of the information, advice and guidance to students and parents and schools, just because that's the point where they're making that decision and it's good to have an informed choice.
Fiona?
There's many things I do, but one, just in response to the point that you said, where you talk about employers not drawing down their money, the levy budget is about to go bust, and therefore I would fund it properly. So although there's many employers still think their levy is there, the money has run out, I would fund it properly and I would focus it on outcomes so that we ensure that we're getting quality rather than a rush to a 3 million figure that we probably won't hit anyway.
So going back to where we started, we've got a reasonably good system going at the moment. It's still in its infancy. It could all collapse. You know, another government will come in. The rules will change. We don't know about the apprenticeship levy. The thing is not affordable at the moment. But we must hope for the best. We've had a marvellous panel here this morning, and we're most grateful to you for coming. Let's give them all a round of applause.